bloody planes. So do you want to take better images? You might be a young budding photographer, you might be someone who's been bought a DSLR recently, you keep it in auto but you want to get into manual settings. This video is for you, and I'm going to show you how I learned how to take pictures and how to expose for the right picture, get you out of auto and get you into manual. So let's have a look. There are three elements to taking a good exposed picture in camera, and this is a Canon. All cameras have these settings, but I don't necessarily know how to find them or where they might be on a Nikon for example. But in a Canon we've got the ISO, which is controlled by a button on top, so you're going to hit that button and you can change your ISO like so. The other thing is your shutter speed. The shutter speed controls how long your shutter is open for. This can range anything from milliseconds right up to as long as you want it to. And we also then have your aperture. The aperture is your lens's ability to open and close, which enables more light to come in or less light to come in. So they're your three elements to your camera settings that you're going to be looking at today. So each of these settings manipulate how your picture is exposed. For instance, consider a exposure triangle. If you move one of these three elements, the triangle, which was essentially a perfect triangle, is shifted a little bit. The problem you have with that is you then have to move one of the other corners to then get that back to a perfect triangle. It's the same principle with these settings, guys. If you move, for instance, say the ISO, you may have to adjust one or both of the other elements of those settings to then get that perfect exposure back again. So this video will work in conjunction with my PDF, which is on my website. If you go to my website, that's www.perfectexposure.me, you can then click on the subscribe button, add in your email address, and the website will send you an email with a link to my PDF book, and you can use that PDF in conjunction with this course today. So let's take ISO. The ISO is essentially the sensor's sensitivity. The higher the ISO, the more sensitive the camera becomes and more light will get to your image. Shutter speed. Shutter speed is obviously the speed of your shutter and how long it stays open for. So if your shutter stays open for longer, you're going to get more light coming into your camera, more light coming onto your sensor, and your image is going to be lighter. Aperture. This controls the amount of light coming in through your lens, which again, if it's bigger, is going to let more light through. If it's smaller, it's going to let less light through. All three of these settings control how much light get in your camera and how your image is finally going to be exposed. So let's consider changing one of these settings. If we've got a perfect setting, I'm showing you this on here, I'm taking a video and I want to change the ISO, currently set at 100 because that's where I want it at the moment. But if I change the ISO of this, you will see that it gets lighter and lighter because the sensor is becoming more sensitive, more light is going to get to the image, or video in this case. So let's just put that back to 100 and we're back to a normal exposed image. Shutter speed. If I change the shutter speed, we're going to change how much light gets onto the image. In fact, with a video I can't go any lower than that, so at the moment I'm going to have to move up the shutter speed, which is, the shutter is opening a lot faster. Even in video you'll notice that the video is getting darker. The same thing will happen to your picture. So let's take aperture. This again, if you change it in camera, which I'm going to do now, change the aperture, will change how much I'm actually reducing the settings for aperture, because with aperture, the smaller the aperture on the settings, the bigger the opening is. So I'm now going down to 3.5 on the aperture, which has really blown out my image, and if I bring it back up, I was at 7.1, which is there, and go past 7.1, I'm now getting an underexposed video, or it would be an underexposed image. If you're outdoors, other things are going to affect your picture, so you have to then adjust for that. If you go into manual and you take an image and then the sun comes out, you're going to have to change your settings. A similar thing is if you take an image and you're in manual and then the cloud comes over because it was really sunny, you're going to have to change your settings again. You're going to have to adjust one of these to get a perfect exposure once again. So each of these settings have a secondary effect on your image. This is where we start to become more arty and get more out of our camera than you would do if you were in auto mode, because auto mode is going to give you a flat image. It's going to take a picture of what it sees and expose to what it thinks is best and just give you that. We don't want that. This is the reason why you're going from an automatic setting into manual. So let's take ISO. Again, we know that ISO can add or reduce light, but the other thing it does, it adds grain. If you were in the dark, your eyes do the same thing. When your eyes become more sensitive, you start seeing little spots, little dots in your eyes. This is the sensitivity of your eye. Camera have the same thing. The sensor on your camera will get more sensitive and it will add grain, what we call noise, to your image. Sometimes this is added on purpose. For instance, if you want to get a film grainy look, you can add that in camera, and you can do that with your camera, just up the ISO. This camera, being a Canon 6D, is a sort of medium professional range camera. I can probably go up to 1600 ISO on this and still be okay with the amount of grain or amount of noise that's in the image. So for those of you with a camera not quite as expensive, you may want to cap your ISO around 800, and that would be your starting point. For me, most of the images I take, my starting point is always the ISO. If I'm going to look for a landscape, I want no grain at all. I want it to be as sharp and crisp. I will make sure my ISO is always set first, and that will always be set, if I can, to 100. If it's a nighttime shoot or I'm indoors somewhere, I may up that to 540 or maybe go up to 800 if I need to. So to take an image like what you see behind me over here, I would set my ISO first, and my ISO would be set to 100. Then I would want to consider, do I want any movement in my shots? Now we've got golfers out the back here, people clearing up and whatnot. If I set a really high or long shutter speed, even to maybe half a second or a second, we're going to get a blurry image because there is people in there. A 1 second exposure is going to get the movement of those people. However, if, for instance, I am shooting maybe a seascape and I want the water to be flat, because at the moment it might be quite windy and their waves aren't doing what I like them to do. I don't like to see waves in my seascapes. I like to see a flat, calm water, sea, lake, whatever's in front of me. So I will go to maybe a second or maybe even 2 seconds exposure. So that would be my next step with landscapes. Consider your ISO, then consider your shutter speed. So then all you need to do is adjust your aperture to get the perfect exposure. For instance, if I start at 100 here, I have a shutter speed. Unfortunately, I've got to keep it at 1/50th of a second on this. My aperture is set now to perfectly expose at 13, an f-stop of 13. So I then get a nice exposed image. I'll take a shot of that, and I get a lovely exposed image. Just there, that's it. And that is how you expose. And to do that, I mean, I use, for landscapes, I use the rear view, you may not get that. You may need to look at exposure grade on the top or on the side or wherever your little grade thing is for your exposure on there, and get your exposure from that, and that's fine. I use that too. However, you then have to consider your aperture, and the secondary thing that the aperture does is controls the depth of field. So when you consider your depth of field, you're looking at your subject and what you want to control in front and behind your subject. For instance, in portraiture, you'll find a lot of professional photographers will have a very low, a very wide aperture to make sure they bring the person out of the image. The background is so out of focus that the subject, or person in this case, would be so in focus compared to the background that they just stand out from the image. And this is what your auto settings on your camera will not give you. You can't do that with auto settings. So let's consider aperture. I'm going to turn this around and face the tree, which is not too far from me. You'll see this in camera because I'll show you. So I've changed lens to show you what I mean by aperture. So if I wanted to get my subject in focus and my background so far out of focus, what they call the bokeh or bokeh, depending on where you live, this is what you're going to get. That's what you're going to get. So as you see from the image, the tree which is in the foreground, which would be your subject, could be a person, it could be something else, but it could be anything. But you want to get the background out of focus, your subject pops out of your picture, you're going to consider your aperture before your shutter speed. I've kept my ISO at 100 because it is light out. I don't need to go any higher than that. My aperture is at 1.8 and my shutter speed is now 1/800th of a second, which is quite fast, to be fair. And this means that you're not only are you getting that bokeh effect because your aperture is so small, you're also going to get such a fast shutter speed, it's going to just still the action. There's going to be no action, no movement in your image whatsoever. This is perfect for, say, sports photography. Now, you won't find a sports photographer with a point and shoot camera or with a camera in auto mode. You're going to find a sports photographer with probably a great big telephoto lens on it, and they'll be using settings like this. They'll be using their aperture very wide open and their shutter speed very fast. So as well as being a landscape photographer, I'm also a wedding photographer. That's where I get my main income from my photography, as well as interior design. Now, weddings are very challenging for anyone, and that type of photo shoot is always going to be difficult. If you're in a studio, you can control the light, you can control your subject, you can control your surroundings, your composition. With weddings, you can't control any of that. There's a certain amount of control with composition because you may have done some research, so you'll know where everything is going to be, where people might be standing. You'll have an idea of maybe the light that you might be getting, because you might have done a recce visit around the same sort of time of day and time of year that you are doing the wedding. But weddings and photo shoots like weddings are always going to be tricky. They're going to be challenging because the light is always going to be changing, the composition is always going to be changing, and your subject has never stood still. So you've got to consider the ramifications of not knowing how to change your settings. Now, I shoot weddings in full manual mode. I don't use any of the auto settings, which it is possible to use. However, I want to control how my pictures look. I want to get wedding photography looking arty, not point and shoot. I want to get the best images for my wedding clients. So I learned how to manipulate my camera to do what I wanted to do, and that's what I'm trying to teach you guys. You no longer need to be in auto. Auto is going to give you a fine image, but it's not going to give you something different. You know, if you stood next to a photographer who was taking images in a manual mode to get an arty shot, I can't tell you that your image won't be as good as their image, but what their image will have is an element to it that your image doesn't. For instance, movement in a picture, or the lack of movement. So guys, download my PDF, watch this video over and over, use it as a reference guide. I'm self-taught, so what I've said to you today isn't technical. I'm not technically minded with this stuff. I taught myself, I learned how to get out there and just shoot, and I've been doing weddings for 10 years now. Landscapes I've been doing for a very long time, even longer than weddings. And I taught myself. I'll be showing you how I edit images in future videos. I use Lightroom and Photoshop, which most photographers do. There are other bits of software out there that you could potentially use, and I'm sure some of you do. So grab your camera, take it out of auto mode, whack it into manual, and start messing around with those, with the settings and the dials. Go outside, stick your ISO at 100, and mess around with your aperture, mess around with your shutter speed. I hope you've learned something, and please leave a comment down below if there's anything else you need to know, or you think I've missed, or questions about your gear. If it's a Canon, I probably will be able to answer it. If it's something else, I may not, but I'll give it a go if I can. And it's just about having fun. Get out there, have fun, learn your gear. So guys and girls, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments box below. If there's any other videos you want me to do, please let me know. Smash that thumbs up button, that really helps me, thanks. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel on YouTube for future updates. Hit the little bell button, that gets my notifications of when I've uploaded a video, so you'll never miss one ever again. So from me, I want to just say thanks, and I'll see you in another video.